Today we're going to talk about something that might change how you view your entire financial situation. And I'm warning you right now, this one's going to make you think differently about some things you've probably taken for granted your whole life. So let's jump right in. Most people think financial stress is a sign that something's gone wrong, right? Like, if enough people are anxious about money, clearly the system must be broken. We must be doing something wrong as a society. But here's a question I want you to sit with. What if that's backwards? What if financial stress isn't evidence that the system is failing at all, but evidence that it's working exactly as intended? I know that sounds wild. Stay with me. Because when you zoom out and look at the big picture, something really strange becomes obvious. We've had decades of productivity gains. Technology has advanced like crazy. We have more financial tools and sophistication than ever before in human history. And yet, most people feel permanently one step behind financially. Not collapsing, not starving, just constantly tense. Bills get paid, but barely. Savings exist, but feel inadequate. Jobs exist, but don't feel secure. Sound familiar? Here's the thing. This isn't accidental, and it's not new. This is a very specific equilibrium, one that modern economies are extremely good at producing and maintaining. And to understand why, we have to stop thinking about financial stress as a personal failure and start thinking about it as what I'm going to call a systemic control mechanism. I know that sounds kind of dark, but hear me out. When people talk about money anxiety and financial stress, they usually ask the same question. Why is this happening to so many people? And the typical answers are things like low wages, high prices, greedy corporations, bad policy. All of those explanations contain some truth. I'm not saying they're wrong, but they miss a deeper, more important question. Why does the system consistently land here? Think about it. Why don't we see mass prosperity? Why don't we see mass poverty? Why do modern economies keep returning to this narrow band where most people are functional, productive, and stressed? That middle zone? That's not random. That's not a bug. From a systems perspective, that's actually optimal. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Okay, so every system that relies on human participation needs some way to regulate behavior, right? In the past, that regulation was really obvious and brutal. You worked because your survival literally depended on it. You could starve. You could freeze. The stakes were immediate and clear. But modern economies don't need desperation anymore. They need something more sophisticated. They need reliability. Think about what an ideal workforce looks like from a systems perspective. You want people who show up consistently, follow the rules, adapt when needed, don't revolt or cause disruptions, don't quit en masse, don't negotiate too aggressively. For that kind of stability, extreme poverty is actually really inefficient. Why? Because people who are truly desperate become unstable. They break rules. They disengage from society. They revolt. They require expensive intervention, prisons, emergency services, social programs. That's messy and expensive. But here's the flip side. Complete financial security is also inefficient from a systems perspective. People who feel genuinely safe and secure financially, they start behaving differently too. They take more risks. They say no more often. They negotiate harder for better terms. They leave bad jobs. They challenge authority. They demand more time off, higher pay, more autonomy. And from a system that needs predictable, compliant participation, that's also a problem. So the most efficient state, the sweet spot, is neither poverty nor comfort. It's managed insecurity. Just enough stress to motivate the behavior the system needs. Not enough stress to cause total collapse or revolution. That's the feature. That's the design. There's actually a psychological concept that explains this perfectly. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson law. Basically, it shows that performance increases with stress, but only up to a point. Too little stress and people disengage. They get complacent. They don't try as hard. Too much stress and performance completely collapses. People break down. They make terrible decisions. They give up. But somewhere in the middle? That's where you get peak output. And modern financial systems are exceptionally good at keeping people right in that zone. Think about how many people you know, maybe including yourself, who live with about 3 to 6 months of savings, if that. Recurring fixed expenses that eat up most of their income. Some amount of long-term debt. Just enough income to function and cover everything. Just enough fear about the future to keep going. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it describes most of the middle class. This isn't a coincidence. This zone produces exactly what the system needs. High labor participation rates, low bargaining power for workers, predictable consumption patterns, minimal disruption to the status quo. Financial stress, in this context, becomes a stabilizing force for the economy. It keeps everything humming along smoothly. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Notice that whenever financial stress becomes too visible, when too many people are really struggling and it starts to threaten stability, Relief suddenly appears. Stimulus checks during COVID, tax credits, student loan payment pauses, temporary unemployment benefits, just enough to prevent total collapse. But here's the key: never enough to eliminate the stress entirely. Why? Because eliminating financial stress completely would fundamentally change how people behave. If people felt truly secure, they would start reassessing their jobs. They would wait longer for better opportunities. They would take more career risks. They would renegotiate their terms. They would have leverage. So relief is carefully calibrated. It's like a pressure release valve. You get short-term relief, just enough to stabilize things. Then slowly, methodically, things return to baseline stress levels. This isn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. This is what's called control theory in engineering. You maintain a system at a specific set point. And debt plays an absolutely crucial role in all of this. We usually think about debt as just a way to finance things we can't afford right now, right? Buy a house, pay for school, get a car. But debt does something way more important than that. It locks in future behavior. Think about it. When you have a mortgage, what happens? Suddenly you need predictable income for the next 15 to 30 years. Avoid taking unnecessary career risks. Prioritize stability over potential opportunities. When you have student loans, you can't easily walk away from your career path. You tolerate worse working conditions. You delay experimentation or entrepreneurship. When you have consumer debt on credit cards, you stay focused on maintaining liquidity. You keep working even if you hate your job. You keep spending to maintain your lifestyle. Debt converts your future labor into present compliance. It's like a contract you signed with the future version of yourself. And here's the really clever part. Debt creates individualized pressure. Everyone feels stressed about their debt, but everyone feels stressed alone. You're not organizing with your neighbors about your collective mortgage burden. You're not forming unions around student loan debt. The pressure is real, but it's atomized, which prevents collective action. It's genius, honestly, in a dark kind of way. This brings me to another crucial point. Notice how financial stress is framed in our culture. If you're anxious about money, what's the message you receive from everywhere? You didn't plan well enough. You didn't save enough. You didn't budget correctly. You made bad choices. You should have known better. The stress is completely individualized, and that's not accidental. That's incredibly important to how the system functions. When stress feels personal, people self-correct. They internalize the pressure. They blame themselves. They work harder. They try to fix it individually. But when stress feels collective, when people recognize it as a shared structural problem, that's when people organize. That's when they demand systemic change. Modern financial systems are extremely good at turning structural pressure into personal guilt. Same outcome for the system, way less resistance. You get people working harder, blaming themselves, and never organizing to change the underlying structure. Here's another layer. We're constantly told we live in a world of financial choice and freedom. You can choose where to work, where to live, what to buy, how to invest, how to plan your future. And on the surface, that's true. Those choices exist. But look at the constraints around those choices. You can choose your job, as long as it pays enough to service your debt obligations. You can choose where to live, as long as it's near employment opportunities and you can afford it. You can choose how to spend your money, as long as all your fixed costs get paid first. Financial stress narrows your actual choices while preserving the illusion of freedom. And that's incredibly powerful, because people defend systems they believe they're choosing to participate in, even when those choices are heavily constrained. Let me pose this to you. What would happen if people were financially calm? Like, genuinely calm. No stress. Fully secure. Calm people behave really differently. They wait for better opportunities, compare options carefully, decline bad offers, exit bad situations, organize with others, demand better terms. But financial stress? Stress compresses decision-making in really predictable ways. Stressed people accept worse deals just to reduce uncertainty, act faster without fully thinking things through, avoid confrontation, choose certainty over potential upside. This isn't about the system being cruel, it's about throughput and efficiency. Calm systems are slower. Stressed systems move quickly. They're more efficient at extracting productivity and consumption. This also explains a paradox that I think a lot of people feel but can't quite articulate. Why does modern society feel so advanced technologically, but so much less secure financially than previous generations experienced? Here's why. Because productivity gains no longer need to translate into widespread comfort to be useful to the system. Technology increases output. Output increases profits. Profits increase asset values and stock prices. But none of that requires the average person to feel financially peaceful. In fact, widespread financial peace would reduce leverage. It would reduce how hard people are willing to work. It would reduce consumption driven by anxiety. So productivity gets captured at the top, while stress gets distributed throughout the population. That's not a failure of distribution. That's a rational outcome of how incentives are aligned in the system. Now, what is relatively new is how invisible this whole mechanism has become. In the past, social and economic control was really overt. You could see it. Factory owners, literal bosses standing over you, clear hierarchies. Today, it's abstract. It's automated. It's algorithmic. No one explicitly tells you to be anxious about money. No one orders you to stay in your job. You just feel like leaving is too risky, like waiting is too expensive, like slowing down would be irresponsible. And here's the genius. That feels like a personal conclusion, like you came to that decision yourself. That's the most effective kind of control, the kind that feels like freedom. But here's the thing. There is a limit to this. Stress only works within a certain range. If costs rise way faster than income, which we're seeing now with inflation, the system gets unstable. If volatility increases too much, if safety nets completely fail, if debt becomes completely unserviceable for too many people, then stress doesn't motivate anymore. It breaks people. And that causes the instability the system was trying to avoid. That's when you see systemic interventions. Not out of compassion necessarily, though individuals within the system might be compassionate, but because instability is inefficient. It threatens the whole structure. So the goal is never endless pressure. The goal is precise pressure. Just enough, right in that sweet spot. Okay, so what do we do with this information? First, I want to be clear. This isn't a call to panic, and it's definitely not a call to blame yourself. This is a call to understand the environment you're operating in. If financial stress feels persistent, subtle, and oddly normalized in your life, like it's just the background radiation of modern existence, that's because it is. Not because you're failing, not because you made wrong choices, but because the system doesn't actually require you to succeed fully and become completely financially independent. It only requires you to continue participating, to keep working, to keep consuming, to keep servicing your obligations. Understanding this doesn't free you from the system. I wish it did, but it doesn't. But it does something maybe even more valuable. It removes the confusion. It removes the self-blame. And sometimes, clarity is the very first form of leverage you can get. Because here's the thing. The most powerful feature of financial stress isn't the stress itself. It's that it convinces people it's a mistake, an accident, a personal failure. It isn't. It's a design choice. It's a feature, not a bug. And once you start seeing it that way, everything shifts. You stop asking, why won't this stress go away? And you start asking a much better question. What is this stress trying to make me do? And when you can identify that, when you can see the mechanism, you can start making different choices. Not necessarily easy choices. The constraints are still real, but at least you're making them with your eyes open. Final thoughts. Look, I know this video is kind of heavy. It's not the usual, here's how to budget or top 5 investing tips content. But I think understanding these deeper mechanisms matters, because you can't navigate a system you don't understand. And right now, too many people are blaming themselves for systemic pressures that were never their fault. So if you've been feeling like you're doing everything right and still stressed about money, you're not crazy. You're not failing. You're experiencing the system working as designed. What you do with that information is up to you, but at least now you know. All right, let me know what you think in the comments. Does this framework resonate with you? Do you see this pattern in your own life? I'm really curious to hear your perspectives, and if this video made you think differently about things, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that goes deeper than surface-level financial advice. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.